Hey, have your attention for a little while. First of all, in case you don't know, there are restroom facilities. You go back towards the door where you came in, and then around the corner to the left, there's a corridor. You just go down that corridor pretty much all the way. So it's almost exactly the opposite side of the building, reverse image of the building, and that's where the restrooms are. So we're going to have an opportunity for folks to talk a little bit about my father. My name is Brad Hessel. I think everybody knows that, but just in case. And I thought I would start out by, I know some folks have seen the obituary that was posted on Facebook, but not everyone has Facebook. So I thought I would start just by walking through some of what his experience was, kind of to set the stage, and then everybody else can comment on all the things that he did. He was born in Brooklyn. His name at birth, or well, when he was born, they gave him the name Leon, and he hated that name. And as soon as he could get away with it, he changed it. I think he actually changed it legally. I'm not sure. This might be before Don Rosenberg, his lawyer, is here, but I think that was a little later, so he may not know about that particular aspect. But he did change his name. It was Lee. I'm sure by the time.
Legal. I changed it.
You did. Okay, good. All right, good.
Did you really?
No.
And his father, Morris, had come to the United States from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as many people did, trying to get away from Europe, and started out with basically nothing. I think his relative, he had a relative in the bakery business, but he got involved in the clothing business and the fur business, and eventually worked his way up to owning actually a whole building on Fifth Avenue. He had a very successful business he owned with a couple of other guys. But at that point in time, the family moved out of Brooklyn and up to Westchester. And Lee was great in Westchester. He was the second of 5 kids. Hilda, the eldest, could not be here today, but she's still alive and kicking in Los Angeles, where she basically was taken care of by my sister Jill. And the youngest of the 5, Alan, is here today, and I'm going to have a few words to say, I'm sure. Lee did great in Westchester. He became the youngest Eagle Scout in the history of Westchester County at that point in time when he was 14. He excelled in high school at track, and he graduated early. By 1942, he was 17 years old. He was already enrolled at Columbia. But then, of course, the war started, or had started, in 41, and he left college to join the Army. And he was an officer to candidate school, but Lee had somewhat of a ambivalent relationship, shall we say, with authority. And fairly quickly, he was bounced out of OCS, reportedly after he absconded with the girlfriend of one of the instructors. And he took some aptitude tests, and the Army decided to send him to engineering school. He was a pretty smart guy at the University of Michigan and then later Michigan State. And he actually designed a flail that was intended to be put on the front of a vehicle, that the vehicle would push the flail and it would find and explode any anti-personnel mines that were there. So in effect, it was a mine clearing mechanism. And the flail, when the mine blew up, it would blow up the flail up into the air and it would come back down again, basically unharmed, because it was like a screen. So it really wasn't affected too much by the explosion. For the last 2 years of the war, he was stationed at a training camp in Kansas as a staff sergeant, where he won the undying gratitude of his captain by ensuring that all the GIs passing through that unit scored excellently at air riflery, which my father was teaching. And he was a really good teacher. So anybody that had any talent at all, he basically taught them to shoot really, really well. And the folks that had no talent whatsoever, he would help them by shooting their targets for them, because he was an ace shot himself. So everybody scored really great on the test. And he got enough brownie points with his captain to be allowed to run illicit weekly poker games in an underused warehouse on the base. He didn't play himself because he enjoyed playing, but he wasn't that good a player. And what he did do was he provided the cards, the tables, the security, the chairs, and he took a cut of every pot for 2 years, every week, twice a week. So the captain wouldn't take a piece of the action, although we offered him. He was promoted to colonel at the end of the war and attempted to persuade Lee to stay, but Lee had at this point accumulated several $1,000s from this gambling enterprise, and he decided to demobilize and intended to finish his engineering degree. But that didn't happen because also at the end of the war, there were lots of GIs flushed with cash, and the fur business was thriving again. And my grandfather, who had gone bankrupt in the 20s and had to move out of his house and so on and so forth, was on the upswing again. So Lee basically joined the family business. And at this time, they moved to Tarrytown. My grandfather came. There was a family in a big mansion in Tarrytown, the Kaufmans, who had been pretty successful in the 20s and 30s. Also had a tough time with the Depression. And when the patriarch died, apparently they were pretty much underwater. They hadn't paid their taxes, their real estate taxes, in several years. The town was about to foreclose on the house, and Morris made a deal where he paid the real estate taxes, and Mrs. Kaufman got to live in the house until, for the rest of her life. And then Hessels moved in the lower part of the house, and so that's how they acquired Whitehall. And within a few years, though, the post-war boom faded, at least as far as the fur business was concerned, and it began kind of a gradual decline. Never really recovered. Lee, however, was ever looking for opportunities. He noted the increasingly difficult straits of many of his competitors, and he used his poker stake to start an off-the-books loan business, where furriers who were hard up for cash would sell Lee a bunch of inventory, complete with a bill of sale, in return for a loan. When the loan plus the interest was repaid, the bill of sale would be torn up and the furs returned as if they'd never been moved. Otherwise, if he didn't get paid back, he had the furs, he would sell them, or Hessel Furs would sell them, and he'd recoup his loss that way. So at this point, he also started an off-the-books check cashing enterprise on the side. In 1950, he kind of impulsively wedded a fashion photographer that he'd met through Hessel Furs, but that marriage only lasted a few weeks. And she moved back to Chicago, and Morris arranged for an annulment. He'd actually already met my mother at that point in time. She was an aspiring actress living in New York, and she was doing some work for Hessel Furs on the side. There's lots of things she did on the side, basically as actresses would try to do. She did modeling for Hessel Furs once a year at their fashion show. So they had dated a bit beforehand, and then kind of it cooled off. After that marriage, though, they picked up again, and they got married. I guess it was 51, and they settled in an apartment in Chelsea, which is on the west side of Manhattan, which just south of where the Hessel Furs at that point was. I think they were on 29th Street, Hessel Furs, the business, and the apartment was on 25th Street. So Lee was walking like 4 blocks to work. It was great. And that's where I was, that's where they were when I was born, and that's where they were when Jill was born, as a matter of fact. I remember the apartment. I don't know if Jill, we moved out when Jill was only 1, so she wouldn't remember it, but I do remember living there. And it was, so it was, I guess it was 55 that we moved to Westchester ourselves. As a wedding present, when they were married in 51, my grandfather had awarded Lee and Edie I guess an acre and a half of the estate. The Whitehall came with bunches of land, and so we had a house built there. And at the same time, or pretty close thereafter, where's Noel? Noel's parents had gotten married. His mother was one of Lee's younger sisters, Mildred, and they also got land, and they also built a house. So we ended up with 3 houses all adjoining Whitehall. The original house then was Noel's house, and then was our house. and that was like a compound, and that's how we grew up. So it was also a plus for Lee because it made the logistics of getting to and from Vermont on winter weekends easier, and that was important, of course, because Lee was like, his religion was basically skiing. And there was an active gun club in Tarrytown during the summer months, and winning enough target shooting competitions to fill up a medium-sized bookcase with trophies. The trophy, we actually visited the house yesterday, and I'm sorry to say the trophies and the bookcase are both gone. But a lot of his woodwork is there, and also there is the bomb shelter. In 1959, with the threat of nuclear war looming large, he also contracted for the construction of a standalone concrete bomb shelter built in the side of the hill. And yesterday, his car, which we now have in our possession, was parked on his bomb shelter. So, by the early 60s, the loan business was fading, and the check cashing business was attracting unwanted attention from the feds. Lee had met Ava Layton, business partner of the independent filmmaker Radley Metzger of Audubon Films, at a fashion event. And with piles of cash looking for a place to be invested, Lee became a principal bankroller of an Audubon release, I Spit on Your Grave, which was a French import focused on racism and adopted for the U.S. market by Metzger, which promptly became a B-movie hit and made everyone a lot of money. So Lee was very impressed with this experience, and in 1963, he started his own film company, Canvas Films, and basically picking up all the lessons he learned from Alva Layton, he got into the film business, out of the fur business into the film business. During its 15-year run, Canvas distributed mostly foreign films foreign-made films that were dubbed and edited for the U.S. market, mostly in the softcore sexploitation market, to mostly independent movie houses and small chains. None of those things exist anymore, by the way. The first of these was Daniela by Night, a 1961 film featuring 21-year-old Elkie Summer. The original title was something like "Be Careful What You Do, Daniela," and it really had nothing to do with sex or anything like that. But there were a couple of risque scenes, and of course that's the way it was marketed. So it was dubbed and edited for the American audience and released in '64 here in the USA. A lot of this work was done for Canvas by Jack Curtis, who's famous for the Flesh Eaters and a number of other innovative things that he did. Business was very lucrative, and soon Lee was helping to bankroll new films shot in New York City, which would then be distributed by Canvas, as opposed to just buying them, foreign ready-made. The first of these was Rent-A-Girl, and that was directed by William Rose in 1965. Then Aroused, which was directed by Anton Holder, and I think that's the one Jill was in, right?
No.
No?
I was in Love Hunger.
Love Hunger, that's right. Love Hunger, right. Then in '69, Raymond Jacobs' The Minx. Their most enduring of the Canvas New York productions was a 1971 film called Cry Uncle, and that was directed by John Avildsen. This was before Rocky. He later went on to be a really famous Hollywood director. And it starred Alan Garfield as a character actor who was still going up until about, 10 years ago, as a dissolute private dick. That's actually, I think it's on Netflix, right? It's certainly available. You can buy it, at least as a CD. Canvas also worked with George Romero of Night of the Living Dead fame a couple of times. On the 1971 movie, There's Always Vanilla. And then in 1973, on a science fiction horror film, which was a real departure for Canvas, called The Crazies, which included a minor supporting role for Edie, and we have one of the other actresses from The Crazies here, right? No crazy actors. Okay. That one was one of the few Canvas financed films to lose money. And by the way, as in telling you, that was remade with the star from Deadwood a few years ago. That I don't think that one made money either, though. Speaking of losing money, by the mid-'70s, most of the independent theaters Canvas had depended on for distribution had closed or been snapped up by the large chains, and the old business model ceased to work as well. That, combined with a debilitating dispute with the IRS, led to the demise of Canvas Films in 1978. And by that time, Edie, my mother, had begun to suffer the effects of early onset Alzheimer's disease that eventually would carry her off in 1981. And Lee spent most of his energy on caring for her. After her death, he focused on real estate, acquiring rental properties in Hunter, New York. Hunter Mountain, the self-styled snowmaking capital of the world. It was the closest significant ski area to New York City, so it's kind of like a match made in heaven. Lee eventually had about a dozen rental units spread out over several houses, and he lived most of the time up there himself, doing most of the maintenance on the rental houses himself, occasionally hiring a helper for more ambitious projects like installing an extra bathroom or building a deck or whatever. He tried to sell a Tarrytown house. The real estate market was down at that time. The values were down, so he couldn't get the price he wanted. Then in 1989, he was visiting my sister in Los Angeles, and he met ex-casting director Sally Dennison. Actually, Jill introduced them purposefully, I believe. Her credits include the China Syndrome, RoboCop, and The Accused. Everyone know what a casting director? RoboCop.
Really?
Everyone know what the casting director does? This is the original RoboCop, not the new
Yeah, I
one.
know.
And coming
Close Encounters.
Does everyone know what a casting director does? Anyone doesn't know what a casting director does? Okay. You don't. Okay. Casting director basically is responsible for figuring out who is the best actor or actress for that particular role.
Oh.
And they don't make the final decision, but they'll bring a bunch of candidates, or usually only one candidate if they're really good and they know their stuff. And then the director and the producer will make the final cut. So.
And Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, lots of stuff that you've heard of. Well, sparks flew, and 2 years later they were married. Lee eventually sold off all his New York property, including his own house. All the ones in Hunter were at a loss because the ski market had also, well, actually, the Hunter in particular had been mismanaged, and rental properties around it were going for a song. And they settled in Sally's Big Bear Lake cabin. Big Bear Lake is about, what, 100 miles east, 2 hours east of Los Angeles. And 10,000 or 8,000 feet higher than Los Angeles. It was on land leased from the federal government in a former campground. So she owned the cabin, but not the ground under it. Skiing in California was better than New York, and there was plenty of land for dogs to run free. And Lee was a big dog guy. So soon he and Sally were living with 3 dogs, including 2 part wolves, Lola and Nika, plus the odd cat or 2. Lee was also a big cat guy. And they became a social fixture in Big Bear. In theory, no one was supposed to be living in these cabins full time, but that rule apparently was not enforced very often. There was a health scare in '95 when Lee was diagnosed with colon cancer, but surgery followed by chemotherapy got him past that. Unfortunately, their marriage did not last. In 2003, Sally decided to move to Idaho, and Lee decided not to go with her. And they formally divorced in 2004. Lee ended up with the Big Bear Lake house and all of the animals. So, ever independent and self-reliant, Lee continued his idyllic retirement, skiing every morning until the slopes got too crowded with snowboarders and in the winter. And then he played tennis in the summer, long walks with the wolf dogs every day. Jill would drag him down to Los Angeles every 2 or 3 months for medical checkups, but he never wanted to stay off the mountain for very long. And let's see, 2007, he had a mild heart attack. He actually drove himself to the hospital. And the insertion of a stent and regimen of statins got him past that. He was kind of, self-sufficient and socially a loner, but somehow or another, his social network in Big Bear Lake, I'm sure part of this was Sally, but part of it, even beyond Sally, somewhere or another, he ended up with, I really don't know how to explain this, but he had like a group of women that would come there to his cabin every Thursday, and like 6 to 10. I mean, and he referred to them as the coven.
What would they do?
They brought their own wine and cheese and snacks, and they would basically have wine and then walk around and wine. Wine drinking and wine whining, and but they cleaned up after themselves. So what's not to like. So by now, he's closer to 90 than 80. Lee was noticeably slowing down. He had difficulty keeping up with the dogs on their walks. He cut his skiing down from 4 hours a day to 2, and he did not go every day. First, Nika and then Lola died of old age. They were not replaced. In the summer of 2011, he stopped playing tennis because he's no longer able to compete. And in wintertime, when the Honda couldn't make the unplowed quarter-mile uphill drive from the road to the cabin, this cabin was, like I mentioned, on the campgrounds. There was actually a locked gate you had to open to get to it, and then you could drive up. And that was fine when there was no snow. But when the snow got 3 feet up, there was no way to drive up. He had to deal with a guy to come and plow it, but that would always be 2 or 3 days after the snowstorm had occurred, because they had to clear the bank, parking lots and the grocery stores first, and then they would get to him. So he would have to park at the foot of this thing and then schlep using snowshoes probably, schlep his groceries up the hill, which was fine when he was 70 or 80, but maybe not so great when he was 87. So in January of 2012, then there was a skiing accident, or actually it was more like a chairlift accident. We don't know exactly what happened, but somehow or another, he was getting on a chairlift and he fell, or maybe he blacked out and passed out and fainted or whatever. He ended up on the ground. He fell about 15 feet. He landed on his head and his shoulder, and he ended up with, he was knocked out. They airlifted him off the mountain because the medical facilities, they do have a hospital there, but it's only really for broken legs. And he ended up getting a cranial edema, which actually developed like 2 weeks later. It took a while. This is like a swelling of blood in the brain. They had to drill into his head to release it. It was touch and go for a day or two, but he made it. And he regained consciousness. He was physically weakened and mentally dazed. We weren't sure he was going to come back, but he did. However, it was very clear his days of living alone in the woods were at an end. So after a few weeks of recovery in Beverly Hills at Jill's house, we flew him to Raleigh, and with his cat, Katie, who was the last remaining animal, for an extended visit. And we put the Big Bear Lake cabin on the market. And by the time the sale closed in June of 2012 now, he and Katie had decided to stay in Raleigh. Katie especially liked Raleigh. There were no coyotes, and it was a lot warmer. So a ton of tools and books and other possessions were shipped from Big Bear Lake to Raleigh, and Lee's 2 kids, me and Jill, drove his Honda across country with him with his guns and his coin collection. So the last 2 years in Raleigh, Lee spent improving my life and Madge's life, my wife's Madge's wife, lives as best he could. He covered most of it in our backyard. The last one with a hinged cover that could be closed in cold weather, create a mini greenhouse so we can grow lettuce and tomatoes and broccoli and other edible vegetables. He cut down a couple of trees that were either dead or blocking too much light. And he qualified for his North Carolina driver's license, studying hard for the test and passing it, taking it, and qualified also for a carry permit, so he could carry his pistol around with him and go take it in any restaurant that didn't have a sign posted saying he couldn't do it. And sharpened our knives. He cut a hole in the garage door so the cats could get in and out. Planted and harvested numerous crops of broccoli sprouts, and resumed management of his investment portfolio, which he managed right up until the last couple of weeks of his life. He did, I don't know what he did in 2014, but he was up 12% in 2012 and up 21% in 2013. So he did a good job. And also demonstrating imaginative and novel, if not invariably aesthetically pleasing, uses for Gorilla Glue. And he fixed my sandals with Gorilla Glue, and there's a lot of glue on them, but they don't fall apart anymore. And generally dispense a characteristic mix of common sense advice and profane, politically incorrect social commentary to anyone who would listen, and a few who wouldn't. By early 2014, following his return from his last visit to California, it was evident that his energy level was flagging again. Then in May, his routine physical-related blood work showed evidence of dramatically decreased liver function, and further tests indicated an inoperable mass centered on his pancreas, 99% plus likelihood of cancer. Lee was not in any significant pain, and he elected to forego a biopsy or chemo or radiation, neither of which have efficacy with pancreatic cancer anyway 95% of the time. His main symptom was indigestion, although for a while he was able to minimize even that by eating numerous small meals instead of 2 or 3 large ones. And he remained relatively active for most of June, although his appetite decreased, and he turned yellow as his liver and kidneys, started not functioning. Pancreas started not functioning well, and he tired more and more easily. He did enjoy visits from his daughter and 3 of his grandchildren who trekked into Raleigh, especially to see him. And after the 4th of July, the course of illness, the last few days he spent in bed or semi-conscious, in no pain to speak of. So that's basically the story. His younger sisters, Martha, died in 2000, and Mickey died in 1992. His oldest sister, as I mentioned, Hilda Hessel Stark, is still alive, and of course his younger brother Alan is here, and me and Jill are still alive, and
And he has some grandchildren.
5 grandchildren, all of whom are here today, and Katie the cat, who is now 22 years old and still living in Raleigh. So that's the story, and I think, Alan, did you want to say a few words? Anyone who wants to come up here, if you do want to come up here, you should go around the podium this way because there's a wire on the other side.
The other way.
Got a nice solid podium for you.
Yeah. Okay. My brother Lee was quite a guy, as you heard, and I looked up to him all my life. We did together. We skied together a lot when he could have a chance, and we enjoyed it. We just hit it off pretty good. In later years, he'd call me about every week. We'd play telephone tag for a couple of times, and then we'd go ahead and get talking. And we'd talk about everything, mostly complaining about where our wives and family put our handling equipment, which is in a garage with spiders and webs and everything else, and never the good spot in the house. And we thought it was just a infringement upon our rights to take away that great looking gear and put it in the basement or in a garage or someplace else like that. Other than that, we went to marksmanship shooting, and he'd come out and shoot at our gun club whenever he had a chance. And we'd take him up there, and he'd blast away with the rest of us, using my ammunition.
Your ammunition.
Because I reloaded quite a bit of it. And so one weekend, I took him out and had him reload for me, which he did a good job. He was a good handy guy, just could work on anything. And we used to discuss the various and sundry plumbing and toilets and stuff like that to make sure we're doing it right. Other than that, he joined the Tarrytown Super Correct Gun Club and shot with them for a while. And then he finally said he got to a point where he couldn't get any better. And I talked to him about, well, boy, you got to go to practice. You got to do this, you got to do that. All the training I had at Camp Perry as a pistol instructor on how to be a good shot. And I went to all this stuff, and he said, the hell with it. I'm as good as I'm going to get, and I'm going to shoot the way I want to shoot. And he did. Anyway, when we got through talking to each other, he would always say, goodbye, Al. And I would say goodbye, Lee, and I'd say, gee, if I knew I was going to live this long, taking better care of myself. And we hung up a long time going over the Second Amendment rights of people, the way we were being treated unfairly. He was a member of the NRA, and I was too. And I tell you this, I'm going to miss him a lot, and everybody else will. And I'm wishing him happy, whatever he's doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
This way. There's a port here. You want to go that way? Jillian?
So I think you all know I'm Brad's sister, Jill, but in case not, what I wanted to share with you actually was Brad and Madge and I, and my daughter Miranda sat Shiva in Raleigh shortly after Lee passed away, and nobody else was able to make it. So first of all, thank you all for coming today, because it's been months. He passed on July 12th, and I think we counted up 10 different states everybody came in from. So that's pretty amazing. I think it's a testament to the closeness of our family and our friends, our good friends who've also come in, and sharing the memories is really important. So thanks for coming. But when we divvied up the jobs, well, there's a couple of stories I want to tell. I told some of them already this weekend, so forgive me for the people who are hearing it again. But we got to Raleigh, and Lee had, of course, all of his guns, and which wasn't worth much by the end. So imagine I just got these huge, hefty bags and started stuffing stuff in, because, you know, we weren't going to keep any of it. We kept a few things, but most everything, including his shoes, because he had these big feet, size 13. And actually, Emil, we thought about you, but your feet are even bigger. So, and so we were going to give away most of his stuff. I kept a couple of pairs of shoes for my son Daniel, who's size 13. But after we toted everything to Goodwill, or your equivalent of Goodwill, Brad, who was busy doing postings on Facebook, probably about the biography you read, he said, well, did you check inside the shoes? Because among other things, in the closet, we found caches of silver coins. There was like this lunchbox sort of freezer chest, and it was full of coins. And then we found more coins, and things were stuffed away. And Brad said, well, did you check the shoes? He was storing cash in there too. And Madge and I kind of looked at one another and went, oops. So imagine their delight at Goodwill when they're going through everything. And apparently he was storing $100 bills in a lot of different pairs of shoes. So a couple weeks later, I was back in LA, and I had forgotten. I brought back 2 pairs of shoes for Daniel. One being, of course, a pair of after ski boots that weren't even used yet. I guess it didn't snow that much in Raleigh. So we looked at, I said to Daniel, my God, we've got to go upstairs and check your shoes. I totally forgot. And we looked in the after ski boots, no money. But then I brought back a pair of dress shoes, which I think he only wore like once, maybe twice to Melena's wedding, maybe. And maybe to Miranda's Simcha's. And so he had his dress shoes there with these things that you stick in, I don't know what you call it, like to stretch them and hold their shape. And I spied underneath a little bit of money. And so I pulled out the press, and there was 200 crisp, two $100 bills. So it was like, oh my God. So Daniel and Miranda each have a $100 bill from their grandfather posthumous. But we did laugh over the fact that Lee was giving, because I don't think any of you, right, after Toby and Morris, our grandparents, your parents were very religious, but one of the things about being Jewish is you're supposed to give 10% of your income to charity. So he did it. But the other thing that I got to do as a job after I went back to Los Angeles was I had my dad's address book. And it was a little scary to go through it because some people were, you know, as you're older and people die off. And so I was afraid to call, but I want to thank some of the friends that came up from Manhattan that were in there. I knew you guys were alive. I wasn't so sure about Don. I also found, but I also found some of the business colleagues that Brad mentioned that when Lee transitioned from the film business, the fur business into the film business. So among the people that I talked to, he mentioned Ava Layton. She was a partner in Audubon Films with Bradley Metzger and also Ray and Ellie Jacobs. And so I just wanted to share because a lot of these people are also in their 80s and they weren't able to come today. But some of the things that were said, because we heard a lot of the kind of borderline legal things that my dad did and how risque he was. And I remember when I was a teen, him sitting me down one night after he'd had a little wine saying, well, now, Jillian, my philosophy in life is do anything you want as long as you don't get caught. I thought, this is great to teach your teens. Now I have teens. Do you think I'd tell them that? But anyway, it's too late. Well, anyway, so, but I do want to share something that Bradley Metzger and Ray Jacobs and David Disick and Lloyd Kaufman, all these people that were in his book that I never met really. And when I first talked to Lloyd Kaufman, he says, oh, your dad was just the most honest man I ever met in the film business. He was great. If you, he gave you his word and you shook on it, he was good for us. And he sent us money. I mean, it was just like, I was stunned, And same thing with Ray Jacobs. He told a great story about my dad, which was, I guess, he had invested in that movie. What was it, The Minx or something? Or no, Cry Uncle was one that my dad produced himself. This was when he was still getting his feet wet, and he had made an investment in one of the first films. It wasn't one that he produced or was involved in at all. It was before Canvas. And he'd made money, and I guess they were out at dinner, and he was saying to his colleagues, well, this was such a good film, and we made money. Why don't we get more? Because there's get the films in Europe and import them here, but then they would hire local actors and shoot inserts, hot and cool versions, as they called it, right? Depending on where the film was distributed, how risque it was. And so my dad was all gung-ho to do more. And Ray Jacobs said, but Lee, I really don't have the money to traipse off to Europe and do this. I'd love to, but, this was kind of a one-shot deal until we can raise more money. And apparently my dad just pulled his checkbook out at the dinner table and said, how much do you need? And on the a check, they went to Europe and they brought back, I believe it was The Minx, and the rest is history. They started really making money. So one thing also that Ellie Jacobs, Ray Jacobs' wife, told me was that this other film that Lee helped produce and made quite a bit of money was called Aroused. And what she said about Aroused was that it opened the same weekend in New York at the Astor Theater, and it outgrossed that weekend an Elizabeth Taylor movie. And that the movie was so successful that, and she said, by the way, it was produced for $27,000, but it was such a successful movie that it was picked by the Museum of Modern Art as an outstanding film of its genre. So I guess we could go to the Museum of Modern Art and there's a copy of Aroused there. I don't know if you knew that, but anyway, I thought that was pretty amazing to hear about his successes, because I remember him, of course, more contemporary, as being an older mountain guy who never wanted to dress up and wore his boots everywhere, and, all his clothes were rumply. But in his time in the film business, he was pretty slick, pretty smart. So I just wanted to share with you some of those anecdotes because they were news to me. I was busy doing my career and didn't really know that much about that aspect of him. But he was really kind of a Renaissance guy. I mean, jack of all trades. And the one thing I did say at the when we sat Shiva for him was, I do feel that this greatest generation, this generation of people who were born and they lived through the Depression and then World War II are survivors, you know. And Hilda, your older sister, who's 93 and a half, you know, whenever we ask her, are you okay? Because she's on a walker. Can you make it up the stairs? I'm an old Army girl. Are you kidding? Of course I can, you know. And that kind of can-do patriotic attitude, it's kind of dying out. So anyway, just want to make a salute to that generation and to Al. And yeah, one of a kind of people. So we'll definitely miss him. Who's next? All right. Miranda. Leah's youngest grandchild, my daughter Miranda.
Okay.
13 and a half.
Hello. So I am Lee's granddaughter, the youngest granddaughter, and so I knew my grandpa my whole life. Actually, my dad was telling me a story earlier about how my grandpa used to take my brother and I swimming pool when we were really, really young, before we could swim, much to his disdain. And I guess it got me not afraid of the pool at the deep end anymore, and that might have helped a lot. Another thing that he helped me with was skiing, because he loved to ski, as everyone knows, because that's blatantly obvious. So he would, at the end of every slope, he would stop and he would give me advice. Sometimes I didn't really need the advice, but it was good to get it. And it really helped me become the skier that I am today, because I like to ski. And he actually taught me how to do a hockey stop, because I used to do this really awkward kind of like pizza stop, and I would like almost fall over. So he taught me how to do that. It was extremely helpful. And so when I was younger, as we all know, my grandpa had a, I would say sort of explicit, but most people would say risque, as we're saying today, sense of humor. And after a while, he just stopped filtering himself around me. I remember some of the really weird things he was talking to my mom about when I was like, I don't know, 10. I was just thinking, like, does he know I am in the room right now and that I am a 10-year-old?
No. Maybe yes.
She's ready to hear it.
Actually, one that I remember was he actually recommended to my mom to take you to a porno.
Really?
Yes.
No way.
Yes.
How did this, I gotta hear this. How did this go? Did he really?
Yes. So
How did this go
I remember,
down?
I was literally, I think I was 9 at the time, sitting in the room just looking. I think I had seen a Playboy magazine in like the living room somewhere, and I had no idea what it was. So I was just sitting there staring at it, and he was talking to my mom. And so they were checking the email and stuff, and I don't know how the conversation started, but he recommended taking you to a porno. He's just like, you know, he needs to see this by now. That's our grandpa. So yeah, after a while, he stopped filtering himself in front of us. And thinking just, he was really, really scared of the coming apocalypse. And I don't know why exactly, but it really, and the conversations he had with me was a lot about how the government is just one giant conspiracy or something, and that the apocalypse is coming very soon. And that's sort of, yeah, martial law. And that sort of reminds me, and this was more when I was about 9 or 10 or 11, and he would have like conspiracy theory conversations with me, which was quite strange, and I didn't understand what was going on, so I just kind of smiled and nodded. That's just how I was just like, yeah, great. So when I see Aunt Hilda, who was ironically born on the same day as me, which is really cool, I see a lot of resemblance in the way they kind of talk and the way they kind of hold themselves, more like, I don't need your help, really, and a lot of conversations about history. Well, that's more Aunt Hilda, but I see a lot of resemblance between them. But so I also remember my grandpa's wolf dogs a lot, and he would always like let me feed them and stuff, which was really fun. And I remember his custom, which was sort of like a, but like in a really deep voice.
Yeah.
You can do it.
He would do the dog thing. Or we would bark at you.
Yes, he would bark at. Yeah, and I also remember, and this is something I will forever remember for the rest of my life, which was sitting down at the table and either him just discreetly grab or my plate. And another thing, we would have this game where we would literally like step on each other's feet, and I would like try to escape, and he would do the barking noise. So that was my grandpa, and I feel like some of my sense of humor I got from him, because after a while, just no filter at all, and my stubbornness. So yeah, I will miss him a lot because he was definitely the awesomest grandpa ever. Like, sorry, Dad, I didn't really know. He was kind of scary, actually. Like, just sit in a chair and kind of stare at you.
Until you got your flip-flops.
Yeah, until I got my flip-flops. But yeah, so he was kind of like the grandpa. Oh, the Requiem?
Yeah.
Okay, so Grandma Sally, yeah, Grandma Sally actually sent in a Skier's Requiem, which is actually perfect for Grandpa, as we all know.
See, Sally still cares.
Yeah. Okay.
Of course she does.
Come, fellows, just buckle my boards on. Lay my ski poles close to my side. I'm off for the Lord's own snowfields. I'm off for the last long ride. You can lie in your musty old graveyards, enjoying your eternal rest, while I ski a trail down some heavenly vale as the last sun sets in the west. In this land there'll be no uphill climbing. It's downhill forever and I won't have to fear for the weather. There won't be a cloud in the sky. Oh, angels will cover the bare spots with plenty of fresh powder snow. And I'll not have to fear for a frostbitten ear, and I'm leaving my waxes below. And this land there's no amateur rating. Each one is as good as the rest. The tempos and Christies come natural. Perfection's no longer a quest. I will slither through heavenly powder till it smokes on the tails of my skis. I'll not have to learn, for I'll know every turn, and I'll do them with consummate ease.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, yeah, that's all I really have to say about my grandma.
I'll say a quick
Goodbye.
thing. She reminded me of a funny story. So, one day, it was like my 13th birthday. Took us up to his secluded cabin in the woods, and Lori, Peggy and Al's daughter, was there with, I don't know if Adam or Ryan or Kyle were there. I don't think the kids were there, but they might have been. But Lori was there, and it was my birthday soon, and she comes up to me. We're about to go to dinner, or coming back from dinner or something. She comes up to me. She's like, "Danny, what do you want for your birthday?" And I'm like, honestly, it's fine. Like, you don't have to get me anything. It's it's totally fine. I'm fine. And Lee comes up behind me and he's like, why don't you get him a Playboy magazine? and Lori goes, is he ready for that? He's like, yeah, he's ready. She's like, okay then, Daniel, if your grandpa says you're ready, then you're ready. And I'm like, no, I'm okay. I'm fine. If I'm fine. So, and then his classic taking the food away from the and the pillow fights. Those were the greatest. I would hear my dad specifically say, Lee, do not have a pillow fight with my kids. Do not do it. And I would go up to him later that day and we'd be alone and I'd be like, Lee, let's have a pillow. He'd be like, okay, but we have to do it in my room or the guest room or whatever. So he wouldn't, like, Dad wouldn't hear, Mom wouldn't hear. Mom didn't care as much. But Dad was pissed. And I'd get Miranda and we'd go into the room and and my dad would walk in and, Lee, what are you doing? Well, I told you specifically not to do this. And that was fun. And then later, I remember Mom, like, towards the end of it all, Mom and I would, he would come in and Mom would be like, okay, so we need to hide the juice, the cookies, the ice cream, we need all the diabetic food out. Like, we need the house needs to be cleansed. And
Because he would find it.
oh, he would find everything. I mean, the places we hid that stuff, we would hide them like just.
Get them under that cabinet.
Yeah.
All the wires.
It's like a crawl space where all our internet is. We have a lock on the door, and we would put. I mean, before Lee, we would put snacks. Dad would put snacks. Miranda and I's snacks in there because we would never stop eating. So he would lock our snacks up, so we couldn't just get them. And then I think Miranda actually picked the lock once.
No, I broke them.
Oh, she broke it. Well, I believe it was picked.
Screwdriver to it. It fell on the other side. I couldn't open it. I was like,
And so we started locking stuff in there because Lee couldn't. I mean, how's Lee gonna get in there? I mean, well, Lee would figure out a way. But we started locking stuff in there and hiding it like only places I could reach because I'm the tallest in the family, and
thanks for making me feel short.
hiding all the food. Hey, it's not the greatest to be tall. I hit my head on doorways.
And I get held short.
Those exit signs. I hit my head on those. So those are my stories with Lee.
You didn't talk about getting
Snowed in? What do you mean snowed in?
I remember that.
Oh, we missed school one weekend because we got snowed in, and I don't really remember it all. But I think I remember shoveling snow, and I wasn't happy about that. I was cold. I was tired. I was grumpy. I did not want to. Shoveling snow was the last thing I wanted to do, and I don't remember I don't remember the last time I even talked to Lee though, because I think I might have talked to him on the phone. I don't. Or probably her bat mitzvah. I don't remember, but I didn't know him as well as all of you guys did, but he was a good guy, and he was an interesting guy. He was like Miranda said, no filter. At a certain age, it was just certain age there was no filter. I mean, cursing, and I do remember one time I was misbehaving, and I was a troubled child, and I must have been screaming at Dad or something, and Lee comes in there, and he's completely fed up, and he starts yelling at me. He's like, now you listen to me, like, you're gonna shut up or I'm gonna smack you across the head or something. And he's like yelling at me, and I'm like, oh my god, and I'm freaking out. And so I remember that whenever I saw him, I'd say to him, remember when that day you were yelling at me because I was yelling at Dad? He'd be like, yeah, you were being a little rascal. You were being a little jerk. I mean, he would say something like inappropriate, like, yeah, you were being a bad word, and I'd be like, yeah. So that's may he rest in peace. That's my stories.
Actually, there was one story that I actually can't believe I forgot. So when I was younger, I'd always ask my grandpa instead of anyone else to read me a bedtime story. Because what he would do is he would take the story, he would change the story. Like, I had him read me once a princess story, and so somehow it went from a really cute little fairy story to the fairies falling in a pit of snakes.
They fell in a pit of snakes, and the snakes ate them up.
Were somehow incorporated in the story, and I don't know how, but I think there was like something where there was food raining out of the sky.
He was the funniest. He was. Oh my God. Mark, you forgot to tell the.
Let someone else.
Yeah.
Do you have some lawyer stories? Now we're getting down to it.
Legal story.
Yeah, the law.
Well, I'm the only one here who is representing Lee Hessel.
How do you plead?
And as a little bit of a side, some of my own quick revelations about Lee. I've met Lee maybe over half a century ago.
And the way I met him was that he and Edie brought down a client. I was a young associate in a law firm in New York City. I don't know how they knew this law firm. I never knew them. And they brought down this attractive redhead as a client. And my boss said, why don't you process a divorce proceeding? And I did. And I ended up marrying the client. Joy, my first wife. She's since passed away. May she rest in peace. But my first marriage is a result of Edie and Lee. And that's how I first met Lee. And then years passed. Lee and I became good friends, tennis buddies, never knew anything about skiing. And then we got into the world of Canvas Films, and I represented Canvas. And in those days, just to give you the legal environment, it's certainly not the legal, liberalized, constitutional flexibility that we have today. There was in New York State what is called a prior restraint statute, where you had to pre-screen through the Department of State of the State of New York Motion Picture Division a censorship screening to make sure that there was no improper film in your reel. And they literally went through reel by reel. Lee and I would go down together, and we'd sit in this screening room down on Center Street in Lower Manhattan, and we would screen his movie. One of the movies was Daniela by Night with Elke Summer. And we had gone there many times, and the censor would stop the reel and say, oh, you see that? We see too much breast. Forget the nipple. With all due respect, forget that. We see too much breast. You'll have to cut that. And it was up to Lee or whoever the producer was of that film to say, okay, I want to get this film out there. I'll eat that clip. And we would go through this process. On this particular film, Lee was getting increasingly outraged at their attitude, being Lee Hessel. And he was fuming, and I was holding him on a leash. I said, Lee, you have to make a business decision. Either you're going to go to war, and I have no idea whether we're going to win or lose, as brilliant as I am, and you're going to be frozen for 2 years while it goes through the courts. Or just let it go, bite your lip, let him cut that ridiculous piece of film and get it on the market. And we would do that for Film and Perfume. And he was in increasing outrage over their attitude. And he was, of course, right. This was outrageous. Ultimately, Elke Summer came up in this particular film, Daniela by Night. We sat in this room. It was a little screening room. And the censor, the guy's named Louis Pesci, may he rest in peace, maybe not, whatever. And in any case, Louis said, stop. And I said, the moment he said stop, we have a problem. He said, I thought I saw the top of her areola. And Lee said, what? We didn't, that's not in the film. And he went up there and said, oh yeah, I see it. I see it. It was probably some dust. See, so you got to cut that. And there was a moment when I realized there was something major about to happen. Lee turned to me and he said, Don, this is it. Screw them. Let's get out of here. I said, Lee. And I said, hold on, guys. I took Lee aside. I said, Lee, do you understand what you're doing here? You're going to freeze this film. This will be a great film. That's one of your biggies. That means we're dead. We're going to be in the courts for 2 years if you want to fight or eat the censorship. Who cares? It's a great film. Let him cut 6 segments of it. No, screw him. He said, I'm out of here. And Lee, not even waiting for me, stormed out of the room. I followed him and I turned and I said, that's show business. P.S. We fought them. Lee says, I'm going to pay you the fee. Be kind to me, you're a buddy, but let's go after them. We filed a brief to render it unconstitutional, the prior restraint statute in the state of New York. We took it to the lower court, Supreme Court, New York County. We lost. We took it up on appeal to the appellate division, New York County, and lost. And I said, Lee, you're making me rich, but you're not getting this film on the market. Screw them. Go to Albany, the Court of Appeals. I've had it with them. We filed a brief to the State Court of Appeals, the highest court, final decision, and it got reversed. Unconstitutional. Lee Hessel, Canvas Films, with a bit of help from me, rendered the whole prior restraint statute in New York unconstitutional. No more prior restraints. True story. However, there's a sad postscript to this. The sad postscript to this is, rather than have Lee get up on being the king of opening up all the other producers, and he's opened the door for film. You can still get arrested by the cops after the filming, and that's still the law on the books now. If it's obscene, that the cops can arrest you, but they cannot prevent you from filming it to the public. He lost all his friendships. They said, now we have no cover anymore. What you've done to us is taken away our skirt. All we had to do was go down there, cut a little here and there, and get that approval, and we know we're going to be able to produce the film. Now, you're on your own. It's Russian roulette. You want to film, you may get frozen. So he made a lot of enemies. He was a hero, legal hero, but he made a lot of enemies, and then he went into a different path, and Jill told about some other great success since that time. All through this, we played a lot of tennis together, Gail and I. We skied endlessly together up both at Hunter. We went out west with Sally. We were invited out to west to ski with him. Had wonderful times. I remember one time we were skiing out in Utah, and Gail and I, who were not great skiers, they're really great skiers. Lee, of course, is a professional. Sally was an incredibly good skier. And we got sidetracked. We got up to our knees in heavy snow, which we hated to ski. We're Eastern skiers. We like nice pack powder. And we got stuck in the snow, and we literally couldn't get up. Sally skis over. Lee wasn't there, with all due respect. And Sally says, "What's going on? What's going on?" I said, "We can't get out of here." And Sally said, "Fuck it, I'm out of here." True story. Forgive the language. Forgive the language. Last but not least.
And Edie was trying to help us down. We were on.
Oh yeah, we got right. What did Lee do? Well, whatever. That was another story. But
Edie was trying to, help us. And, no, you can do this next trail. You can do this next one. I mean, but I can remember Lee, seeing him tall with the jacket hanging out, and here he was taking off in the distance, whereas Edie was there, and she
trying
was
to help us through it.
trying to help us on the new slopes. Now you can do this. Yeah, let's try this.
Now, one last anecdote about this totally unlovable evil man. More recently, Lee got stopped for a traffic light. He went through a yellow, not even a red, in Tarrytown. Got a ticket, and apparently he didn't call me. I had won enough battles with him, and he paid the ticket. And he told me about it. He said, "Don," he said, "I am so annoyed. I'm so furious. I went through a yellow, not even a red. Even the red is outrageous. That I should have the right to go through a red, but a yellow, absolutely." So he said, "I went through a yellow, and they gave me a ticket." So that's outrageous. That's terrible. Yeah, and then about a week later, he said, "Don, guess what?" So what's going on? He says, "It's taken care of." I said, "Well, what'd you do?" He never called. He said at 3 a.m. the next night, this is vintage Lee Hessel. He said, "I took all of my marijuana seeds and I went down to the police station with a flashlight and I planted them in the flower bed all around the police station." That's Lee Hessel. I love him.
Oh, I know a different story. Very similar. When my mother got arrested for growing marijuana, but it was Lee's.
And as I recall, the seeds are from a result of them, the police taking all the marijuana plants out when he was.
Maybe that was a different planting. I don't know.
No, I thought it was also part of maybe he did it on multiple times.
Yeah, I think he might have.
But I am Madge Cohen. I'm Brad Hessel's wife, Lee's daughter-in-law, and I I really did not know Lee. I had met him, of course, but I only saw him for a day or so here or there over the years until he moved into our house in 2012. And we never had any problems, but it was a real experience. I didn't quite know what I was in for. I had some idea, but I learned a lot from Lee. We got to know one another. I hid lots of chocolate, which he always found. And he was diabetic, for those of you who didn't know. But it was quite an effort. But one of the things, this is the latter stages of him just slowing down a little bit. As Brad had mentioned, he built these cold frames, and he replaced parts of our deck. He did lots of little chores. Now, my father owned a lumber company and hardware store, and he never allowed me to touch a power tool. He would say, Madge, this is how you do it, and I'll do it. Lee taught me how to do everything. And it was really great to get to know him and have him in the house. He directed me to replace the deck, cut the cat door, do lots of things, and we had a real affinity, and I had no idea that this man was somebody who I would really share a friendship with. But in the last 2 years of his life, I got to know him and I got to be friendly with him, and that was really, really an honor to have that opportunity. I'd heard all these stories through the years, and I was kind of in awe of him. And it was great to have this opportunity to be with him and have him as a teacher and as a friend. And I was very lucky to have that opportunity. I'd seen my 3 kids go to Big Bear, and they went skiing with him. They went out and they spent a lot of time with him, and to have him back, although he always wanted banana bread and ice cream and everything else. But he was fiercely independent, always teaching, always correcting, and always right. So it was a great experience, and I'm glad that I got to know him. And I'm glad that you all are here, and I know you all have parts of him in your memory, and we will all carry him on with us. So.
Continue with the legal things.
Well, you're the judge. You have the last word.
All rise.
He was the one who made the decision in their case.
No conflict of interest. I'm Noel. I'm Lee's uncle. Grew up next door. Nephew. What did I say? Uncle. Well, before I start on the legal stuff, I'd forgotten completely about something that Miranda and Daniel triggered in me. Not growing up next door, not only was it the Oreo cookies that attracted me to my cousin's house, but Lee's collection of Playboy magazines that were they were not hidden under the mattresses as in most houses, but they were in, I can tell you right where they were. They were in a bookcase right next to the fireplace, in perfect order, and I really liked that house. As Don alluded to, I'm presently a judge in Colorado. Before that, I was a district attorney for almost 20 years after graduating law school, which, as you can imagine, led to a number of interesting conversations with my uncle, given his, as Brad put it, ambivalent with authority, which started shortly after I was hired as a district attorney. I was back here, I believe it was probably Christmas of '85, visiting, and Lee still lived in Tarrytown. And I get home from Colorado and I'm unpacking my luggage, and in my luggage is a loaded .32 caliber handgun. Yeah, that's a good thing you didn't know about that one. Loaded. And you know, I calm, because we had a discussion about, oh, you better start packing because people are going to want to kill you, blah, blah, blah. And he was right about that. But and he's like, oh, the 32 isn't going to stop anything, but, it's better than nothing. And, it's just mortified, that not only was it a gun, but loaded. If that had happened today, I wouldn't be a judge. He put it in my luggage, which fortunately at least was checked through. Yeah, and this 32, I believe you still have this, Deb? The little, yep, okay, yeah. Finally was able to give it to my cousin, Debbie. And as soon as I gave it to her, first thing out of Al's mouth is, that's not going to stop anybody. That's better than nothing. All true. But what I will always take with me from Lee, who was obviously very important to me, growing up next door and seeing almost every day of my life and my youth, was his playfulness. And that started from my earliest memories of him, where at family gatherings, he'd lie down on his back in the big library of my grandparents' house and dangle me from his feet sticking up in the air, carry me around on his shoulders. And when you were small as I was and as tall as he was, that was pretty cool. All through life, until the last time I spoke to him, he called me. I guess it wasn't that unusual, but somewhat out of the blue. It was either the Saturday before he passed or so within 2 weeks before he died. And he'd always want to know who I threw in jail that week, or throw the book at him. But we had many discussions about Second Amendment law and First Amendment law, and but he remained, true to his core throughout his life. Certainly, as I knew him, he lived his life his own way. He went out his own way, he filled a room when he came into it, and he certainly leaves a void as he leaves the room. So, thank you for being here.
Hello, everybody. So I am Lee's other grandson, Emil Hessel, Brad's son. I was guys, and they're roughly organized in chronological order. So I think these are all color Lee's life pretty well. So as you've heard, Lee's quite the character. And growing up with Lee, especially with him on the other side of the country for most of my life, he sort of loomed over me as more of a legendary figure almost, very, very surreal. I think when I was a kid, he was somewhere between a grandfatherly rascal and a rascally grandfather. It was a delicate balance. My first impressions of him were going out to Big Bear Mountain. It's my first real memories of her in Big Bear. And it was what a magical man. He had wolves. He played with fire. He took me hiking, but he also had this mysterious, mystical superpower to torture the heck out of my sisters without any repercussion. And they laughed. I tried the same thing. It didn't go nearly as successfully. So I definitely immediately got a lot of respect for Lee. As I got a little older, I got to know a few of the other aspects. As you all heard, he's very much an adventurer. Some things that weren't mentioned: he was a pilot, and he's always willing to give flying lessons, but mainly to his cats. That was a threat of his to give them flying lessons if they bit him. Oh, yeah. He actually even once, and this I don't know if this was touched on, but and maybe with the legal representation here, I want to close their ears, but once sold pen guns to the Greek underground. It's a little side story that didn't get brought up, and that's about the most I know about it. So, but even in my experience with him, we're pretty adventurous. There was one time I must have been visiting him myself. Maybe I was 12 or so. We were driving down mountain, Big Bear Mountain. I'm a 12-year-old, and it's a mountain. On one side of the cliff, on the road, there's a giant cliff, huge drop off, thousands of feet, certain doom. and went down to LA, I think, to drop me off at Jill and Arthur's, and we're in a cloud. You can't see your hand in front of your face. And I'm like, "Hey Lee, you doing all right?" And he's like, all right. And I get more and more nervous. And Lee's stubborn as nails. I love him to death, and I get a lot of that stubbornness from him. But all of a sudden, he turns to me at some point. He's like, "Hey, look, I need a favor." I'm like, "Oh my God!" If Lee's getting nervous driving down Bear Mountain, asking me a favor, I know I'm in it deep. And he's like, "I need you to open the door." And I was on the passenger side, and I need you to stare at the lane line. And if you see me veer more than a few 6 inches to one side or the other side, I need you to say something. So I'm like, your solution isn't to stop and my grandson. More to the right. So that was Lee. I also started to explore Lee's alternative moral and legal framework around that time. Lee took me to, there's this place in Bear, a Mexican place, and they served a big Juan. It was a giant burrito. And the winner of this burrito, if you could eat the entire burrito in one sitting, he had a t-shirt, name on the wall, and I think you'd eat there for free or something for a year. So Lee told me, we went there, I tried it, I couldn't do it. I was eating a lot at that point. Still couldn't do it, but Lee said he did it, and he had his name on the wall, sure enough, and the t-shirt, and I asked him how he did it, and he said, "Well, you see this window right here?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, Nika and Lola are pretty hungry," and apparently instead of tying them in the car, he just tied them up outside the window, and they weren't looking, just kind of one for him, one for the dog. So it's sort of the opposite of pulling the food away. Or maybe the evolution of that. He ends up feeding it to the dog afterwards. So I think that was just an innocuous experiment in Lee's moral framework. But he was a giant softy at heart. Everyone knows that. He actually, some of my time with him in Bear Mountain, he would deliver groceries to an elderly couple up there. Never really told anyone about it. He would just take it and put his snowshoes on, go trekking over when it was cold, check up on him. Real nice guy. In the latter years, when he was living with my parents, it was a hoot listening to him talk to Hilda. Oh, he would go on and on. Hilda, he would like clockwork. He would complain about it like clockwork. He would call her every day, hour at a time, check up on her, complain to her, fight with her, but he loved this side to him too. As I got even older, Lee once again reestablished his legendary status in my life. I joined a fraternity when I was in college, and this was just about the time Lee really hit the peak of his internet prowess, which meant just torrents of emails. I'm sure a lot of people here can empathize with Lee emails, but I started forwarding them to my fraternity email list. And Lee immediately was a huge hit in the fraternity. I would retitle it like another message from Grandpa Lee, and oh my God, it was probably the most inappropriate stuff on my list. And it came to the point that new people in my fraternity would come in, and they'd be like, "Is he a real person, Lee? Is he a real person?" So quite literally, he achieved legendary status in a fraternity, something you probably never thought he would do, not even finishing college himself. Taught Ellie and I some dubious brownie recipes. He was just all around a character. There's a lot of things he leaves me with. His stubbornness, his mischief, the Hessel thumb I have from him. I actually, and poignantly once, got out of a test in a very middle school. I slammed a book down. And it looks pretty messed up, right? So I use that Hessel thumb very to Lee's liking, right to the office. But definitely his sense of charm. If there's one thing that describes Lee for me, it's when you see him, any stranger, any clerk at the grocery store or waitress, cracking jokes and just laying on some Lee Hessel charm and patented manner. So there's a lot that I learned from Lee. Some I learned what not to do, some I learned what to do, but I think there's a lot we can all take away from him, and I'm fortunate to have had him in my life. So thank you.
Oh no, here comes trouble.
I'm trouble. No. My name is Ellie. I am Lee's second oldest granddaughter, or second youngest, I guess it depends on how you look at it. It's middle child. And a lot of the stories that I think of, stories like them have already been told, but I'll add a couple more in. I remember Lee first when we lived in Brooklyn and he lived up in Hunter. We would drive up there, and I don't actually have conscious memory of this story, but I was told time and again that when I was maybe a year, or maybe actually just like 3 months old. Okay. Yeah, less than a year old. So Lee was an avid skier, and he felt very strongly that, being introduced to this early was incredibly important. And so he took me from my mom and put me on his back in a carrier or something, and decided. Oh, that's even worse.
At his knees on her own skis.
And he decided to go down the hill with me on his shoulders and Melina in between his knees on little skis. And so I got started early. My actual first memory is going up to Hunter, and Melina and I would be led out of the car. We lived in Brooklyn, so we didn't ride in cars that often, I guess, and got out of the car and we'd run inside and we'd tell him we had to go to the bathroom, and he'd pick us up and hold us by our feet and shake us and say, "Do you still have to go to the bathroom?" Probably a terrible idea, but I guess we were well enough potty trained, it worked out. That's always my memory of Lee, that he was always very playful, very loving. As we got older, I got to go out for my bat mitzvah present from Jill and Arthur, I believe. I went out to California for a week, and I spent half the week playing with my awesome brand new little cousin, this cute little baby boy. And the other half of the week I spent up with Lee and Sally. And Lee, who had let my father.
Oh, we have to tell the story, Tim.
Okay.
I noticed.
Okay, so Lee actually grew up on Worthington Road in Elmsford, and it was a former farm. And so there was actual equipment there. And at a very young age, he was being kind of engineering oriented, as we later found out. He got into driving stuff around. Like he drove a tractor, he drove a car, and this was all on their territory, their land, so it was no problem. And so, fast forward to the 60s, now I'm 8, 9, 10 years old. He decides that it's a good idea. It would work for him. It's going to work for me. It's time for me to learn how to drive. So we had a brand new 1964 Corvair. And this was a good Corvair. This Ralph Nader had complained about, unsafe at any speed with the early Corvairs. They fixed all that stuff. So this was the good model. It really worked and everything like that. So we lived on a private road, Oak Avenue, which was gravel, and you had a steep driveway, but once you got up on Oak Avenue, you could go back and forth and so on. It was no problem. So I think I was about 9, and he got me into the car. And no, I must have been about 11. Okay, about 11. All right. So he got me into the car, and I could see over it and everything. I was tall for an 11-year-old, and he had me drive from one end of Oak Avenue, from where Cobb Lane was, all the way to the back, and then turn around and come back again. And I was okay on the first drive down, and I actually did the turnaround, which I was very proud of myself, with no problem. And then I started coming back towards Cobb Lane, and I don't know what happened exactly, but there was this tree that was like growing. There was a stone wall between us and the next property, and there was a tree that had decided it wanted to be on our property, not on the next property. And somehow or another, the tree and the Corvair kind of like met. So that was the end of my driving until, I was 16. And I figured that, Lee had learned his lesson. He wasn't going to try that again. So that's my part of the story.
Yeah, so the second part of the story is Lee did not learn his lesson, or maybe his lesson was that you need to wait until the child was at least 12. Because when I was 12, I was visiting Lee and Sally, and they decided that I could drive. And I drove around Big Bear for like 20 or 30 minutes on
public road.
On public roads.
Oh my God.
I started in a parking lot, so that might be slightly better. I don't know. But I get back to the cabin that they were describing earlier that had the private. I'm in the car. Lee and Sally are going, "Oh my God, she's gonna kill us!" And the dogs are crying because you're scaring them so much, and just making fun of me as Lee is wont to do. And so we get back, and they all get out of the car immediately. "Oh, you're too scary. We can't be in the car with you." They undo the gate and they wave me forward, and I go forward. And then they keep waving me forward. And I was like, okay, I'll go forward a little bit more. And I kept doing this. And then I figured, well, they just want me to go up the rest of the way by myself because they were making fun of me so much. They don't want to get back in the car with me. I'll do it the rest of the way by myself. So it had started snowing by this point, and the hill's really steep, and I'm driving up myself, and I get part of the way up before getting into a ditch. And then, I figured I could get out of the ditch. I just had to, hit the gas really hard, right? So I started hitting the gas, and I see in the rearview mirror Lee running up the mountain, yelling and waving. And he told me to get out of the car, and Sally and I went in, and he got the car out of the ditch as it started to snow. And, that summer or that next I bat mitzvah, and he couldn't make it because he'd had a health scare right before then. But he, always the loving grandfather, sent a letter to be read at my bat mitzvah, and it had this story for all of my friends to hear.
It was the first time his parents had heard it.
Yeah, my parents had heard it too. So, I have lots of memories of him being loving. In the last, I live the closest to my parents at this point, and so in May and June I came down a couple of times after he had gotten sick, and I got to hang out with him a lot. And he likes to put up this rough exterior, so he'll talk about guns with me, but you can always tell that he really loves you, because he was telling me which guns I should take from his collection and how I could use them to stop burglars, rhinoceri, various gauges that I would need to affect different results. He took me out one night. I was there over Memorial Day weekend. We went out to a really nice French restaurant. He insisted that we had to find a French restaurant to go out to, because that was the really nice place in town. And we went out to a French restaurant, and he got the waiter to get us wine and all sorts of other things. He made a whole big night of it. And he had a handicap spot, and I tried to park in a handicap spot. But we had to leave that for somebody who really needed it. But I don't know. I'll always, all the stories that everybody tells him, the pillow fights and the holding children upside down and shaking them, all of those things. And throughout all of it, I always remember how loving he was and how much he cared about everyone in his life, even though he tried not to show it sometimes. And I'm really glad I got to meet everybody here today that I hadn't met before, because it's nice hearing the different sides of Lee. And yeah, that's my part. So thank you.
So you've heard from 4 grandchildren so far. I'm the last, and I'm going to make this short and sweet. We've been here for a little while. Add my 2 cents. I'm the oldest grandchild. My name's Melina. I'm Brad's eldest daughter. Holding upside down and tickling, pulling the plates, incredibly explicit conversations in front of young ears. I experienced all that, and I love that, and that certainly characterizes my grandfather for me. But something that was especially meaningful to me was when in June, my husband, Ryan and I have been married for just over a year now, went out to visit Lee. So we knew that this was probably the last time we'd ever get to see him. And Lee knew it too. So despite being sick and despite being tired and despite not eating, he was spending as much time as possible with us. And, when he was too tired to be downstairs, I was upstairs in his room with him. He liked to watch old movies on Netflix during the day. Westerns. I watched a couple Westerns with him that trip. And as Ellie said, he was definitely, having long conversations about which guns that living in Chicago, we should have to protect ourselves from the eventual riots. But what was meaningful to me about this is that he was talking to me about this little, but he was really talking to Ryan about this more than to me. And, giving Ryan stock advice and telling Ryan the guns that he needed to have to protect what his advice to Ryan to help us and to help protect his granddaughter. And as sexist as that was in some ways, it really meant a lot to me that he accepted Ryan immediately and assumed that this was Ryan's responsibility, and was sharing these things with Ryan for me. And I want to tell my siblings and my cousins that he would do the same thing for you if you were able to meet the person who's lucky enough to be your partners in life. Thank you.
Well, sure, please, if anybody else, yeah.
I'm coming at this from a totally different perspective, so I thought I would just say a word or two. And actually, listening to all of these stories has really reminded me of a lot of things that I have remembered in a long time. So my name is Amy Litt. I'm from Tarrytown. I was childhood friends with Jill and Brad. I hadn't seen Lee in decades, aside from, I guess, at your dad's memorial, just a brief, hello at a brunch like this. And aside from that, I really hadn't seen him in, I don't know, 40 years or more or something. And so my recollections of Lee are all from way back then when I was a teenager. I'm 60 now, so you can do that. It's interesting, the words that people have used really hit home to me. The sort of mischievous and sort of always joking, inappropriate, and all these other things. And I realized, looking back on it, that somebody else used the word intimidating. And I definitely, Lee kind of scared me a little bit. And I think the reason was because I just never knew what was going to come out of his mouth. And, I was always something really, risque and off color that would totally embarrass me as like a, 13-year-old or something like that. It could be something that was sort of, making a little bit of fun at my expense or something. Or it could also just be something, really sweet. It was always with a twinkle in his eye, always with the warmth in his voice. So there was never anything sort of, mean or anything about it, but I always felt a little bit sort of like, oh my gosh, there's Lee, what's he going to say? What's going to be the, but I wanted to mention also that I totally forgotten about the Playboys, and I had completely forgotten about pulling the food away. So I want to thank you all for that. So anyway, I remember him as being this, this combination of tremendous warmth. I mean, his voice and his presence, just tremendous warmth and love, and just a little scary.
Well, I really want to thank everyone for coming. It's been great to see all you all guys and meet, in some cases, meet you for the first time and get the different perspectives. I certainly learned things today I didn't know about, and it's definitely been a ride. I think we can say about Lee that he definitely lived his life the way he wanted to live it, and his passing, he was diagnosed, in June, or in May rather, and died in July. And it was like, not even 2 full months. Well, yeah, I guess about 2 full months. And he was not in much pain until maybe the last couple of days, really. And even then he was semi-conscious and didn't suffer much. So, I mean, it really, the way he went out was kind of pretty similar, in the sense that it was kind of the way we'd all like to go, quick and without too much fuss. So it's been a really great experience for me, for sure. I'm sure that there's a lot of what I do is will reflect what I've learned from him. And as Amy will but what some things that I learned not to do from him. So anyway, thanks a lot. There's still some food if anyone wants. Alice, well, come up so we can hear you.
Oh, many words go through my mind.
Am I going to introduce and explain who you are?
I'm sorry.
Alice lived for many years with Lee's older sister, Hilda, in Passaic, in New Jersey, and really has been very much part of our family for at least, 10 years, maybe more?
20.
20 years.
He had a great sense of humor, as everybody knows, very quick-witted, very intelligent, and his compassion. He would just happen to call for Hilda, and he'd ask me how he's doing, and I'd say, okay, and oh, come on, what's the matter? What's the matter? And I'd open up. He encouraged me to open up to him, and he would, by the end of the conversation, I would feel uplifted. I mean, he was wonderful that way. And the other thing, his sense of humor. At one point, I had rescued this little dog. She couldn't have been more than the size of a football. And he was due to come back that day. He had come in earlier, but went out to the store for something and comes back to Hilda's house. And Molly, he had not, I don't know if you remember Molly, the little dog. He had not yet met Molly. Well, anyway, he knocks on the door. I forgot that I had locked the inner door. I go to open it, and he looks down, and he said, "Whoa, little shit." And with that, guess what she did? He said, "Well, that's the first poop on command dog." And as I said, I really loved, I admired the fact that both Alan and Lee would call their sister regularly, talk to their big sister, and very often I'd eavesdrop on the conversations. I'd hear her laughing, and I'd say, I got to get in on this, But I great guy. I will miss him. I will miss him. It's like losing a family member. So, anyway, thank you.
Speaking of Lee's last days, one thing does occur to me. We were dealing with various services, social services, and transitions people and so on and so forth coming to the house. And actually, there was a couple of days there we had oxygen delivered, which Lee refused to use, of course. And then, but nobody came. And then finally, I guess it was on Thursday before he died. It was a social worker. I don't know what came. And I had known that I had to, get his room ready. I mean, he had a lot of stuff in his room, like about 3 rifles, and he had his 32 or his 38 special that he carried around with him most of his life, and various other things that had to move out, all the ammunition. So I had moved all that out. So there was nothing in the room. I didn't think there was anything in the room that would cause a problem. And she came and she did the inspection of the room, and she said, "Oh my God." And I said, what is it? "This has to go." And I'd forgotten. He had a 30 caliber, 30 Winchester, not a Winchester. It was a Colt. That's right. It's a Colt gun that shot the same bullet as a 30 Winchester rifle. It's called a cowboy a gun because the same bullet could shoot in a rifle and could shoot in a pistol. Anyway, he had this under his bed. I'd forgotten. He always slept. He had a gun, so near within reach. "You can't have this. These patients at the terminal. You can't have a gun. That's no, absolutely." She was very, very concerned that the gun had to go. So of course we moved that too. And by that time he was really out of it. So I mean, it really wasn't. He didn't even know it was gone, or that it had been an issue. But anyway, so he basically managed to. I guess he spent. What the problem was, he had spent like the night with it before, and she hadn't realized it was there until the next day. So like his next to last night, he still had his gun under him.
They found another one an hour before he died.
Oh, really? Oh my God, I didn't know that.
The hospice people were out there, and the hospice people found another one under the bed.
Oh, geez. Well, so anyway, he went on his own terms. So. All right, thanks again.